Hi guys, so let's now take a look at a current account deficit and what policies you can actually use to remedy or rectify that situation. Okay, so firstly, we've got expenditure reducing policies. And under expenditure reducing policies, you can see I've put down use of contractionary monetary and fiscal policy. So it's either a matter of actually increasing interest rates, increasing interest rates, which of course increase the cost of borrowing, increases the reward for saving money, and therefore is likely to lead to a reduction in consumption and investment. A lot of our consumption, of course, takes place on foreign goods, on imports from abroad. So thereby, using such a policy is argued to actually be advantageous if you want to correct a balance of payments imbalance on the current account. Okay, so we could also take this further and we could look at the fiscal policy role as well, and the fact here that you could even increase taxation, so increase your withdrawals from that circular flow of income while reducing government expenditure possibly. Now, these are very, very dramatic steps to actually take by a government in order to actually attempt to rectify a current account deficit. I would imagine in such a scenario that the government would be so concerned about the prospect of being unable to finance this current account deficit and thereby declare that there is a real need to actually intervene. But in most circumstances, this isn't likely to actually play through. Some of the reasons, of course, for that are because of the impact on economic growth. Economic growth does tend to be that primary main economic objective of economies. So why would you want to actually increase interest rates, increase taxation, decrease government spending just to correct your balance of payments position? What about the actual prioritisation of the macroeconomic objectives? That would give you a wonderful analysis and evaluative point to consider here. So the authorities must deem this situation to be so precarious that they really need to do something, which could actually end up causing a bit of a policy overshoot and really dampening economic growth and aggregate demand in the economy, thereby even possibly tipping the economy into a recession possibly. So obviously you're going to experience reduced business and consumer confidence in such a scenario. The amount of investment that's undertaken would decrease quite rapidly in such a scenario as well. And that would have further repercussions for the economy and for the long-term health of the economy, because then you are reducing the long-term productive capacity of that economy. Right, so I don't really deem this as plausible in most circumstances, really. Another reason, of course, is that interest rates going up would actually lead to an appreciation of the currency. If it leads to an appreciation of the currency, it actually makes imports cheaper. Yes, it may mean that households have to pay more on their mortgages, perhaps, but that may be partially offset by the appreciated currency and thereby the actual increase in their real purchasing power of foreign goods. Okay, so yeah, interesting stuff, but let's move it on to number 2A, expenditure switching policies. First up, we've got protectionism. So protectionism, obviously involving tariffs, export subsidies, quotas, non-tariff barriers as well, so regulations that can be introduced to really ensure that there aren't that many imports coming into the country, or there's much reduced imports. Now, of course, such a scenario is going to increase the price of imports, and that may actually generate cost-push inflation within the economy. If your manufacturing firms are reliant upon inputs from abroad, it may actually mean that those manufacturers lose their degree of competitiveness, their price competitiveness erodes because now the cost base has increased because they have to actually deal with this cost push inflation generated by tariffs or quotas here. There may be the prospect of retaliation by other trading countries as well. And of course that runs against WTO rules, so the World Trade Organization. And World Trade Organization members really don't want to be doing this, and it's likely to cause quite a bit of a stir. Okay, so you don't want to get involved in a trade war. Now there's also the impact on the dynamic efficiency of the economy as well by using such strategies. If you're supporting your industries that aren't actually that competitive and you're using those export subsidies to do so, is that really the best means of actually utilising that money? What's the opportunity cost of supporting those firms and so on? So again, it's a very, very dramatic action, and of course we've heard a lot about Donald Trump actually using this to protect the US manufacturing industry. Okay, now 2B, expenditure switching policies again. Okay, and this time we've got currency depreciation. So if you want to actually depreciate the currency, there's a number of ways you could do this. You could reduce interest rates, or you could undertake quantitative easing, for instance. Okay, now in such a scenario, of course, the currency would fall in value because there's an increase in supply or a fall in demand in the case of reduced interest rates. And as the currency depreciates, you've then got the prospect of that Lerner-Marshall condition kicking in and the J-curve effect. So things, when it comes to your actual trade position, are likely to get worse before they actually get better in the longer term. So you do need to consider the relative elasticities of your exports and your imports. If your exports are very, very well differentiated, and they are quite unique in their actual service that they provide, then there may be quite inelastic demand for those exports. So as a consequence of that, the cheaper price in overseas markets may not actually lead to big increases in demand for our exports. If at the same time imports are more inelastic for a given economy, then of course reducing the price is not really going to, increasing the price of those imports is not really going to have that big effect on quantity demanded if demand for imports is inelastic. Okay, so yeah, we've got the Marshall-Lerner condition to consider and the prospect of currency wars. Okay, something that James Rickards, the economist and investment banker, has written quite extensively about. The use of quantitative easing and printing currency. Okay, so number 3, supply side policies. Supply side policies, investment, research and development, retraining, education, investment into capital goods and the infrastructure. These, of course, are about boosting aggregate supply in the economy. And by boosting aggregate supply in the economy, that will help to actually improve your international competitiveness. Okay, so there's the cost to consider. Supply side policies are notoriously expensive. Okay, there's also big timescale issues involved in actually implementing such programs, and what sort of rates of return are you actually likely to generate on any given investment, any research and development, any retraining program, and so on. And then there's the prospect of this not working at all, and even the government actually making the situation worse through government failure. Okay, so there's a number of real downsides to consider there. Right, so let's finish this up in style here with some evaluative points regarding the current account. Okay, so overall points that I'd want to consider if I got an essay which was asking me about how to rectify a current account deficit. Well, I'd want to focus in on the fact that you've really got to look at the conflict of macroeconomic objectives and identify what any given government is likely to prioritise. In most circumstances, of course, they will prioritise economic growth above other economic objectives. It really just depends how bad the situation is on the current account. You've also got to consider when it comes to protectionism, WTO rules, and the dynamic impact, the long-run impact of protectionism and protectionist-based policies. So how it can actually distort an economy by not allowing the processes of creative destruction and that increased economic welfare to actually play through. Okay, then we've got time lags. Yeah, we know there's big time lags when it comes to supply side policies, and then there's time lags involved when it comes to currency depreciations, of course. Okay, and then finally, lovely point this. Does the deficit matter? Well, of course, it depends. It depends on a whole variety of circumstances. I would add in there, well, it's likely to depend upon why it's actually happened in the first instance. Okay, so what is the actual reason for that current account deficit? How long has that situation persisted for? The longer it persists, obviously, the more of a worry it actually becomes. How is that deficit actually being financed? Now, if it's being financed via short-term capital flows, that's likely to be a big problem. If it's longer-term portfolio flows, well, that's not really likely to be so much of a problem. It's interesting stuff we've got here. I hope that's been all right, guys. Thanks ever so much.